All right, let's take a deep dive into the world of TIF districts, specifically in Maywood, Illinois. We've had a ton of requests to really dig into what's going on over there, and we've got articles, we've got meeting notes, official documents, the whole shebang. Seems like Maywood is considering some major changes, and we're here to figure out what it all means.
Yeah, TIFs can be a really powerful tool for cities, when they're trying to revitalize struggling areas. And what Maywood's proposing, well, it's pretty ambitious to say the least.
Definitely ambitious, but first let's make sure everyone's on the same page. What exactly is a TIF district?
Okay, so imagine a city wants to, spruce up an area that's seen better days.
Right.
They create a TIF district, and the way it works is property taxes within that district get frozen at a certain level.
Frozen.
Any extra tax revenue that comes in from new development that goes into a special fund, specifically for improvements within that district, kind of like a piggy bank just for that area.
So ideally, it's a win-win. Attract investment, boost the local economy, make the area more attractive. But of course, there can be downsides, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like any financial tool, TIFs need to be used carefully.
And that's where things get a little, well, interesting in Maywood. They're not just proposing one new TIF district, not even two. They're looking at 4 new TIF districts. And get this, these districts would cover pretty much the entire village.
Whoa, the whole village.
Almost the whole thing.
That's a lot. That raises some big questions right off the bat.
Yeah.
Does all of Maywood really meet the criteria to become a TIF district?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. To become a TIF district, an area has to be designated as either blighted or a conservation area, but those labels, they're not always as clear-cut as you might think.
Right. It's not like every single building has to be falling apart to be labeled blighted.
Exactly.
There are specific criteria, but they can be, well, open to interpretation. For a blighted area, you need at least 5 out of 13 factors present.
5 out of 13.
And they have to be present, quote, to a meaningful extent. Think. Aging infrastructure, declining property values, high vacancy rates, that sort of thing.
And for conservation areas, a big chunk of the buildings need to be over 35 years old and show signs that they could use, a little TLC.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. New construction can be included in these TIF districts. So you could have brand new buildings swept into these zones. Makes you wonder, is this really about addressing blight, or is there something else going on here?
That's the thing about TIFs. Sometimes municipalities use them, well, let's just say, not always for purely altruistic reasons. They might be looking to grab more tax revenue or maybe favor certain developers. We got to scrutinize these proposals very carefully.
Scrutiny is definitely needed. And that brings up another point, Maywood's transparency record. It's a little shaky. According to the Illinois Comptroller, they haven't filed a required TIF report since 2022.
Wait, 2022?
You heard that right. These reports, they're supposed to be like public checkbooks, showing exactly how that TIF money is being used.
Right. Transparency is essential for accountability. If you don't have those reports, it's impossible to know if the TIF money is actually benefiting the community, or if there's something fishy going on. Missing reports are a huge red flag.
It's definitely suspicious. And to make things even more interesting, there's an audit of the village's finances that's supposedly nearing completion.
Interesting.
So will this audit shed some light on those missing TIF reports? What else might it uncover? We'll have to wait and see.
Definitely intriguing.
But for now, let's take a step back and talk about the nuts and bolts of how TIFs actually work. For anyone who's still a little fuzzy on the details.
Sure. So imagine a pie chart representing property taxes.
Right.
Normally, slices of that pie go to schools, libraries, the park district, all those essential services.
All right, keeping the lights on, keeping things running.
Exactly. But when you have a TIF, the city basically says, hold on, we're freezing the size of those slices for now.
They're putting those slices on ice.
Yep. Exactly. Any extra pie that gets baked from new development, that all goes into the TIF fund.
So the property taxes within the district are frozen at a base level. Any increase because of new development or rising property values, that goes straight to the TIF, not to the other entities that would normally rely on that revenue.
It's a pretty big shift in how the money flows.
A big shift. And remember, this isn't a short-term thing. The maximum lifespan of a TIF district is 23 years.
Wow.
And it can even be extended longer. So we're talking about a long-term commitment here, potentially huge implications for Maywood's future.
It's a big deal.
And here's another detail that really jumped out at us. According to our sources, the village manager of Maywood, Well, they're also the designated TIF administrator for all of the districts.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot of power concentrated in one person's hands.
Yeah, definitely raises questions about oversight. Is there enough independent scrutiny of how these TIF funds are being managed? Who's watching the watchman, so to speak? Something we need to look into.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritty financial data here. We've got a table comparing revenue for Maywood's existing TIFs over the years, and some of these numbers are, well, pretty eye-popping.
Yeah, let's see. The Madison Street Fifth Avenue TIF, that one was established back in 1998. It's brought in almost $60 million over its lifespan.
60 million.
$60 million. That's a serious chunk of change that could have gone to other taxing bodies.
Think about it, that's $60 million that didn't go to schools, libraries, park districts, all those essential services.
It really makes you think about the opportunity cost, you
Yeah.
know? What are those entities missing out on because that money's being funneled into the TIF fund instead?
Yeah, it's like a seesaw. When
Yeah.
one side goes up, the other side has to go down. We have to understand the full impact of these TIFs, not just the revenue they generate.
Exactly. And that's where this summary from the Cook County Clerk's office comes in. This shows how that TIF revenue is actually distributed, breaks down which agencies and organizations are getting a piece of the pie. This can give us a better picture of if the money is being used effectively and if it's actually addressing the needs of the community.
It's all about connecting the dots. And speaking of connecting the dots, remember that TIF we mentioned earlier, the one that was canceled back in 2014?
Oh, right, right.
We still need to figure out what happened there. Was it a success story or did it fall short of its goals?
TIFs can be canceled for a bunch of different reasons. Sometimes it's because they were successful and the area has been revitalized.
Makes sense.
But sometimes it's due to mismanagement or maybe lack of development or even legal issues. So digging into why that particular TIF ended could give us some clues about Maywood's track record with TIFs.
Yeah, like what lessons did they learn? Did they learn any lessons? What happened there?
Exactly. We got to look into that.
It's like a puzzle, right? We're gathering all these pieces of information, trying to figure out how they all fit together.
Absolutely. And, that whole thing about the village manager also being the TIF administrator,
Yeah.
that adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
Definitely. You mentioned earlier that it raises questions about oversight.
Right. Ideally, you want some separation of powers to make sure there are checks and balances,
Mm-hmm.
Having the same person in both roles, well, it creates potential conflicts of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Who's providing that independent scrutiny of how the funds are being managed?
It's like the referee also being a player on one of the teams, right?
Exactly.
You'd naturally be a little concerned about their impartiality.
Totally. And, on top of that, those missing TIF reports,
Oh, yeah.
that lack of transparency just really amplifies those concerns about potential problems.
It feels like we're walking through a minefield here.
A little bit, yeah. We need to be cautious and really think critically about all this. It's not about assuming the worst, but it's about asking the right questions and demanding some clear answers.
And that's where the community comes in, right? Residents need to be aware of what's happening and make their voices heard.
Absolutely. This is about their community, their tax dollars, their future. They deserve to be informed and engaged in this process.
For sure. And speaking of being engaged, those upcoming community meetings about the TIF proposals, those are a great opportunity for residents to do just that.
Those are going to be crucial. People can go learn more about the details, ask some tough questions, and really hold their elected officials accountable.
It's a chance for people to speak directly to the people making decisions that will directly affect their lives. No middleman, no filter.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the technical side of TIFs, the money involved, but let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the potential impact of all this on the people who live in Maywood, the human side of the equation.
Yeah, that's a really important point because TIFs, they can have a lot of unintended consequences, both good and bad.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, one of the big concerns is gentrification. Like, what happens if these TIFs do lead to a bunch of new development and those property values start going up? Could longtime residents get priced out of their own neighborhoods?
That's a really tough situation to be in.
It is. We've seen it happen in other cities where revitalization efforts unintentionally displace lower-income residents. Maywood needs to make sure any new development benefits everyone, not just the people who can afford higher rents or those higher property taxes.
So finding that balance between, attracting investment but also preserving the existing community, that's a tightrope walk.
It is, and it takes really careful planning, takes community input, and a real commitment to making sure there are affordable housing options.
You also mentioned earlier that TIFs can sometimes worsen existing inequalities.
Yeah, that's another big concern. Because if a TIF district ends up mainly benefiting wealthier residents or certain businesses, well, it can create a wider gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's crucial to make sure that whatever benefits come from these TIFs, they're shared equitably, that they actually address the needs of every part of the community.
So it's about looking beyond just the shiny new buildings, and the promises of economic growth. We have to ask, who's really benefiting from these TIFs and who might be getting left behind?
Those are the tough questions Maywood needs to be asking. And that's why community engagement is so important.
Absolutely. Residents need to be informed, they need to be involved, and they need to have a real say in shaping what happens in their neighborhoods.
Exactly. And those community meetings we talked about, those are the perfect opportunity for them to do just that. They can learn about what's being proposed, ask their questions, and voice their concerns.
It's like a town hall meeting, right? Citizens have a direct line to their elected officials. No filter, no middleman.
Precisely. And it's a chance for them to really advocate for policies that promote fair development and ensure that the benefits from these TIFs reach every part of the community.
Well said. So, what advice would you give to Maywood residents who want to get involved, who want to make a difference?
I'd say first and foremost, stay informed, read the local news, attend those meetings, and do your own research. Knowledge is power.
It's like being a detective. You got to gather the evidence, you got to connect the dots, and you got to be willing to challenge the official story.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Talk to your neighbors, reach out to your elected officials, and make your concerns known. Collective action. That's what drives real change.
This deep dive has been quite the journey so far. We've uncovered a lot of information, and we've raised some pretty big questions.
Yeah, it's been an eye-opener.
But we're not done yet. In part 2, we're going to explore the potential impacts of these TIFs in even more detail, and we're going to dig deeper into how the community can shape Maywood's future.
So stay tuned. We've got a lot more ground to cover.